Welcome to the Cups of Consciousness show. I am Aleya Dao, your host. I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine, a sound healer, the author and founder of the 7 Cups of Consciousness. I have produced 9 sound healing albums and have recorded over 2,000 meditations online. I am an energy practitioner and help people shift their consciousness using their energetic fields. And this show is all about using your energetic fields to shift your consciousness, as well as exploring energetic concepts that help you create a more empowered and connected life. This episode is an energetic session that explores concepts, energetic practices, and protocols that are similar to a prayer, which help you transform particular aspects of your life. When you listen, recognize that some part of you is using your energetic fields to shift your vibration, which in turn shifts your consciousness, your behaviors, your beliefs, how you react and respond. You might even go into an altered state, so use caution if you're driving or doing something that requires a focused mind. With all of this work that I present, remember that it is your energy shifting you in your own unique way. That way you stay in control and empower with your process. So take a deep breath in, pull yourself into your line of light, and explore your inner terrain in a safe and supported space. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Cups of Consciousness podcast with me, Aleya Dao, and today I am interviewing Abby. Abby, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
It's so great to have you here. And we were just talking before we started how we both have a passion for consciousness. Dive into that and just tell me a little bit about maybe how that began for you, how you became aware of it, what you did to explore those avenues.
Yeah, well, it's ever evolving, right? Isn't it? I mean, because we're only so aware. Like we can only be so aware with 95% of our, conscious awareness, not conscious, only 5% of conscious awareness, right?
Yeah.
But even as a young kid, when I look back now, people like you will say things like, I mean, I don't know if you will, but people who really are in the energy world and everything would say things like, well, I've always heard or seen things as a kid. And I was always like, really? I wish I did. Like I was always so grounded in reality.
The physical dimension.
Physical. Yeah. I mean, I grew up, my grandmother would say dead is dead. Like there wasn't even a belief in after, like there was nothing.
Wow.
And I remember I used to be like up at night, like literally like picturing my grandfather in a grave when he died, like just bugs all over him. And, like, cause it was like, oh my God. And I would just think, this is it. This is it. The end, the end, the end. I remember just that scaring me so much.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I really was always someone, my favorite topic was the elephant in the room. I was always provoking people in the family by like wanting to talk about something that nobody wanted to talk about, wanting to like bring light to a situation that was happening,
Yeah.
And so
and a curiosity.
And a curiosity.
Right? It's like, well, why?
Yeah, why is this happening? And why is no one talking about it? And like I'm having this experience inside myself and no one will validate it,
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, as a young kid, I mean, that came out a lot as like anger, like and needing to be validated that I had a right to feel these things and all these kinds of things. And so that's really, I mean, honestly, I became a psychotherapist with really poor motives. I mean, like on the one hand, it was because I didn't believe I was smart enough to go to business school. There was
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was also this idea of like, I need a room that I can create that people can come in and they can have their truth.
And a place where people walk through the door and they're willing to explore the why.
And they're willing to explore the why. Yeah. And at that time, right, as a psychotherapist, which I'm not anymore, it was all about why, which, we now know, of course, why is a word that the brain can just kind of loop on over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And in the straight talk therapy world, I always say you can know why, you can know exactly why you did what you did, you felt what you felt, and you can never change. Or you can never know why, and you can experience great change, whether it's through the energy work that you're doing or the type of work that I do now.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I was a psychotherapist for many years. I then, my life fell apart, and I got divorced and grand fanfare, which is the topic of my TEDx. And then when I remarried, at that point I was like, you know what? I don't even care. Like, I don't care what I do. I just want to be, I had a 3-year-old. My husband now at the time had a 3-year-old. I don't even care. I don't need this prestige of being a psychotherapist. I don't need to know anything any more than anybody else. I don't need to like whatever. And so I went into my husband's business and helped him as a financial advisor for like 12 years. But of course, that's not what I'm here to do. And
And maybe
so
not I mean, I'm sure you're very good at it, but is that your passion?
it wasn't my passion. No, I was like, and I told him, I was like, yeah, I want to talk to people, but not about money. Like, I don't want to talk about money. You know what I mean? I have so many things I want to talk to. I want to talk to people about consciousness, And so that's when I went back to my roots. I didn't go back and get my license as a psychotherapist, but I started more in the form of a teacher of unlearning. I had become a trainer for Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I did that for a few years, and I learned a lot about neuroscience. I'm a certified heart math trainer.
Great.
I I use positive intelligence in my work now. And then, of course, lots of, just ancient wisdom practices. Of course, what we know is that, neuroscience is just barely scratching the surface of what we've known, forever, right?
Absolutely.
So beginning to learn about all of that and like putting all of these experiences together, I began to do more of what I'm doing now, which is really a teacher of unlearning and working with executives and teams and speaking on stages and helping people understand how to live life with more ease and flow and less stress and anxiety. And all of that comes from really understanding this higher consciousness, which when I have a podcast now as well, I was sharing with you called the Intuition Incubator. And it feels like every guest I have on is talking about how they feel like the uprising of consciousness is really happening.
Absolutely. It is.
And those of us in this field believe that. But man, sometimes when I step outside, I'm like, really? Like, it doesn't feel like it, like.
I know it doesn't look like it in the outer world, but I had a really interesting insight yesterday where I felt this profound light streaming onto the planet, doing this huge up level with our consciousness. Our pineal glands are getting exposed to a greater frequency of light, which then triggers these enlightenment symptoms and experiences and a shift in consciousness, greater perceptions of connection. We're also in the middle of in the baby stages of a technological evolution revolution. And so we've got this light, and then also our technology is going through this huge plume. And fear and anger is a mechanism of grounding and stabilizing when you're destabilized with light.
Now let me think about that. Fear and anger is a way of stabilizing when you're destabilized by light.
Yeah, so it's a lower frequency, so it grounds you, which then helps you stabilize with this huge plume of light that we're
Yes,
receiving.
that makes so much sense. That's amazing news.
Yeah. So
because there's so much anger and fear right now.
There's so much anger and fear. It's like kind of through the roof, but here's the challenge. Everybody's watching the fear and the anger as opposed to this huge expansion of light that we're all going through.
Right. Or just observing. Just being able to observe, right, without being so attached to, the thoughts that the left brain is saying and the personality constructs that you've created. Right. You're this kind of person. You're that kind of person.
Right. People get so entrenched in their beliefs.
So entrenched, and they don't realize it's just the ego. It's just the ego. It's literally, that's it.
Or like perceptions of disconnection.
Yeah.
And self-hatred projected externally, shaming everybody.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Like from my perspective, we do the opposite of what we're intending on mastering. So I'll be in self-hatred, I'll be in shame, trying to actually cultivate self-love, but shame and hatred has a pain suffering point. And so if I slap myself enough with the self-hatred and the shame, then eventually, after millennia, I will cultivate self-love.
So I talk about shame and anger as well. It's slightly different topic. We're talking about kind of two different things, but I talk about the anger shame cycle. Okay. And this
dive into that one.
Yeah, well, I just think it seems to be incredibly relatable. I know it is to me because I experienced it a lot as a younger woman, and I see it so much with women in the older stages as I am, where, and actually young women too, the anger shame cycle is like the two sides of the same coin, right? So if I self-flagellate, let's say God forbid, I make a mistake, or, being selfish is like, that's like the scarlet letter. That's what I call, like it's the worst thing in the world to be selfish, right? And
Yeah.
so let's say that I feel that I'm being selfish and I'm shaming, shaming, shaming. And then when we do that, we basically, whatever the other person in the situation was doing that made us get frustrated or made us take time for ourselves or whatever it was, we completely disassociate from, because we are so bad in that moment. We become all bad, which means whatever happened in that situation, we no longer see the other person's part.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Which
problem,
on
of
some
course,
level is totally self-absorbed.
it's totally self-absorbed. And this is the thing. And this is how I really get people to pay attention, because nobody wants to be self-absorbed. Right. And so when I explain that your shame and your guilt is every bit as self-absorbed as your self-righteousness, it's the same thing. So what happened, and that's of course what happens under stress. We get very me focused.
Sure.
Me.
It's survival.
It's survival.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is, and like the greatest example of this really is like, when you're in relationship, well, any relationship really, but an addict relationship is a really great example. You get really frustrated because the addict is doing all the things that they're doing that you've told them not to do, or you've asked them not to do, or whatever. And you're enraged because it absolutely is obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we've done this before. We've been through this before. They're controller saboteurs going crazy. They're really angry and they're self-righteous and they're telling themselves, I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. And then they behave poorly.
Yeah.
And when we behave poorly, eventually we're going to be hit with shame.
Right.
And that's the other side of the coin. And so now we're in shame. And when we're behaving poorly, we are completely dissociated from the side of ourselves that has any fault or any wrong, can do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now we feel bad because we lost our mind. So now we're just all in shame. And now whatever that person did is no longer relevant because we are just a horrible person. And so we forget to validate, wait a minute, you're going through something really hard. Like this was really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to like love yourself through this and love the other person. And like there's nobody's fault here, whatever. We forget to do that. And before we know it, it just happens again. And then we get enraged again. And it's this anger, shame cycle.
And every time it happens, it builds, right? It's like a bigger loop.
A bigger loop. And at no point is there any reality because we're not seeing ourselves as a whole person,
right?
Good, bad, whatever. We're not seeing the other person as a whole person. It's a lot of what's happening in this country right now, right? Like whatever side you're on, it's just like all good, all bad.
Right. And I actually think that part of the thing that we're seeing in the world right now, and I was just reflecting on it this morning, of COVID put everybody into a fight or flight.
Totally.
And when we're in fight or flight, we don't have access to our prefrontal cortex. And so we don't have access to that little 2% higher thinking center. And so people literally aren't thinking clearly and they can't hear anything other than the emotional triggers that they're in, which is fear, anger, fear, anger. And so that's really interesting, that cycle that you're speaking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an epidemic, right? Like, it's true. You can only think equal to the way that you feel.
True.
And people are in so much fear that they can't, and anger that they can't even have a conversation. They can't
listen.
They can't listen.
Right. And if we can't listen, now we can't receive new information. Now we can't go through a process of transformation.
Right. And we can't honestly look at ourselves.
Right.
Right. I mean, because we know, like, if we do the work in here, all the things out there get fixed.
Absolutely. But earlier we were talking a little bit about attachment. And so many people, it's this old coping way of creating a perception of connection, a perception of safety. And I say perception because it's not actually real, where we've got our attachment external out on everyone and what everyone else is doing, which brings all of our awareness external instead of our awareness internal.
Mm-hmm.
If no awareness internal, then we can't change.
then we can't change. And it's funny when you get, the more you are able to observe, right? The more you just stop the attachment to the outcome. Because a lot of the spiritual community, I was just doing a webinar with a friend of mine on this, there's a lot of spiritual numbing, right? And like the spiritual community, a lot of it is about manifestation. Like that's the pop way, right? Like I want to manifest this, I want to manifest that. But manifestation means that you want something,
Mhm.
right? You are in lack. Nothing wrong with it. Listen, I mean, like I love manifesting, like that's the greatest way to make anything happen, right? But the attachment to whatever it is that you want
That's
is
external.
that's
Yeah.
external
Yeah.
and that you are identified with.
Hmm.
That is the personality, the identity getting identified with. I want this, and then I'll be okay when I have that,
Right.
as opposed to self observation just for the sake of observation,
Mhm.
right? Like just for the sake of, and this is kind of crazy, but elevating your consciousness as your responsibility to give something back to the greater consciousness,
Right.
but not to get anything, right? It's not transactional.
It's
That took me a
service.
long
It's
time.
service. And that's really that
Yeah.
you're right. That is transactional.
Yeah.
It's like, if I do this, what am I going to get?
Yeah. That
Or,
took me a long time to
Mhm.
get. And just being able to be in observance without it being like, okay, and now I'll be a good person and now I'll get all the things. No,
Right.
maybe you will, maybe you won't. And usually it'll come in a way you least expect, but who the hell cares? It's not really about that.
Right. And a lot of people put their reference points for their sense of self-worth externally on what they do manifest or what they don't. And so if they are able to pull it off, then they think that they're going to have a greater sense of self-worth, i.e. self-love. But it's an unfulfilling cycle that people get into. And then the more that they create, the emptier that they feel, especially when they're trying to be fulfilled by these outer things.
Yeah. And it's a false idea that you're aware,
Yes.
that you have awareness.
Yep. Absolutely.
That doesn't equal awareness.
Hmm. And it's interesting you talking about the observer. From my perspective, when we observe, we're witnessing ideally our divine self, our connected self, our light.
I love
And
that.
just in observing and witnessing our light that's within, it then amplifies, it increases our sense of awareness.
Exactly. Yes, right. Like just in observance, that shifts the energy.
Totally.
That is that third force, that light energy
Hmm.
that you're looking for, right? Not for the reason, but just to develop it inside yourself.
Right. Right.
And
And
that's
then,
why I named my podcast the Intuition Incubator, because I feel like we've lost such touch with that.
hmm,
We have to incubate it. We've got to
we have to
nurture
absorb.
it.
We have to
Yeah.
absorb it. We have to have time and space for integration. And with social media, technology, and the fast-paced world, we have lost, a lot of people have lost that space of integration.
Yeah.
And when we don't integrate, we don't digest, we don't absorb, now we can't ascend.
Well, there's
Because,
not even an attempt to integrate.
right, right, there's not even awareness. And it's like, I think from my perspective, 80% of the work is integration.
Yeah.
Just like a meal, well, only 10% actually of the experience is in your mouth. The rest of it
Yeah. Yeah.
is, I mean, it's so fleeting, that tiny little moment. And then we have to allow for this unconscious or behind the scenes or energetic process of profound absorption.
Yeah. It's a great metaphor. It's a really good metaphor. I have clients sometimes. I've got a couple clients that, I can just see, they're done, like with that hour, they're like,
They're like, I'm full.
that's good. Enough to chew on. I need to swallow now. I need to go, need to go swallow. Okay. You know,
Yeah, that's great. There was an insight that I was having today. Again, I always meditate in the morning and get all these little pearls. And in our world right now, there's so many people that are looking at
yeah.
what's wrong with the environment, what's wrong with our politics, what's wrong with our social structure, our circles, our finances. And the challenge is that when everybody's looking at it through the lens of what's wrong, then when we do bring our awareness internally and we try to cultivate more awareness and inside, we might take that lens of the what's wrong and turn it in and be looking for the what's wrong in here instead of looking for what's right. And when we look for what's right in here instead of what's wrong, then we're actually able to start seeing what's right in the world and amplifying that.
And what's interesting as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the way that we have become habituated into bonding, right? Think about it, like we're bonding over what's wrong with us,
Right.
right? Like I got,
Trauma, wound.
I'm this way too. I have that too. Or what's wrong with them? Can
Right.
you believe they did this? Can you believe this happened? Blah, 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 blah. And this is how people are connecting and bonding, which is, of course, in total stress and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's empty,
And it's
right?
always been that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Now we're just seeing it more clearly.
it's just it's magnified because everybody's in such extremes, but they think that's connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not connection. And the reason, we can bond over, I have these conversations, like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, you bond over things that you agree on. If you like to do this, do you like to do that? And I'm like, why don't we bond over being souls in a human body? Why don't we bond over the light in between us, the space in between you and me? Like, why don't we bond in our humanity? I don't care if you like, to, dance and I can't do that, and I, whatever, like, can't we bond in another? This is why this discussion of consciousness to me, like, and everybody gets to have their passions, right? Like everybody gets to have their highest values, like
Right.
if somebody wants to, gets super, super excited about their thing, that's amazing. Then that's lighting them up. That's what's causing them to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than bonding over an issue or a problem or some type of material thing. Somebody might be able to have a conversation about architecture and they're just lighting up and they're talking to other people about architecture. And it's like, oh my God, and they're getting inspired, right? Like that's how I feel talking about consciousness, and it's not that one topic is better than the other. It's the energy with which you're bringing to that conversation and what it's doing to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes me think about, like, so from my perspective, we have the essence within, and in our essence, we've cultivated very particular vibrations like a kindness or an integrity or a strength or a courage or a passion. And rather, the passion is the reflection of the quality that we've attained internally. And so when I think about like just pure essence connection, each individual is connecting with this vibration inside themselves, like, oh, I'm in my kindness or I'm in my peace. And then the other person is in the vibration of their essence. And then we're reflecting almost like on a pond, which is what the relationship connection experience is, the vibration of our essence externally, but we're not putting it out ourselves. We're just standing in front of another person and seeing their essence because we have the capacity to see our own, reflect the light. Then we have the ability to witness the quality that's emanating from the being sitting across from us.
Which all comes right from looking inward first,
Totally.
from
But
connecting to that inward first.
and what's right? What's perfect? Like what is in here that's perfect? Because a lot of the times people come through the door and they're like, there's nothing good about me. And I'm like, you wouldn't even have launched into this world. You couldn't have even gotten through the doors if you didn't have something inside you.
And even that is self-absorbed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've had this
Mm-hmm.
conversation with a client before. I'm like, who is this bad? Who is this bad?
Right.
Is there anyone else you can name that is this horrible? No, just me. Aren't you special? Are you that special?
Right.
You're the only one that's this horrible. And of course they laugh because that's ridiculous and nobody wants to be seen as thinking they're special. So, but yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Consciousness, people, their journey, evolution. And I think too that one of the reasons why people are getting so triggered in the world right now is because they haven't calibrated their expectations appropriately. So we might have a particular level of awareness or kindness or peace or integrity, and then we're projecting that externally onto people, thinking that they are going to have the same level that we do, and then upset that they don't.
Yeah. And I think it's really, honestly, I mean, I feel like so much of it is a lack of understanding that if you spot it, you got it.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you think someone is so dumb or so divided or da, 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 you know, you're doing the same thing. Like that's why you're looking at it that way.
Right.
You know, and it's oh, I forgot where I was going with that. But
Well, like
yeah,
if somebody's like, oh, they're really rude, really disrespectful,
yeah,
and they're upset that they're disrespectful, it might be that that person is actually wanting to cultivate more respect for their own self. They're projecting that out onto others, wanting everybody else to do it, thinking that if everybody else does it, then somehow they will have more respect for themselves.
they'll feel better. They'll have
Yeah.
more self-worth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
how, yeah, that's a disease in and of itself.
it is. And in your work with people, what is the thing that you run across that is the most challenging?
The most challenging for me to work with or for
Hmm.
people to
Well,
deal with.
just in general, like when you think about somebody coming through the door or a situation or a corporation or an organization that you're working with, what comes to mind in terms of the most challenging energy?
That's a really good question. I think the most challenging energy right now, and again, you know, I'm one of these people, and I'm sure you are too. You know, it's like I'm not for everyone.
No,
Like
no.
people don't, you know, like I am doing like a very specific work that people are rolling their sleeves up. They want something.
Hmm.
They are in question. They don't have all the answers.
Right.
And so a lot of times, you know, there's a lot of people I don't work with because it's just not aligned.
Yep.
And that said, you know, one of the most difficult energies is when someone just has no curiosity.
Hmm.
They are so attached. And it comes from a state of stress. You know, it
Hmm.
comes from a state of stress. But when they are so attached to their 3D belief or that left brain analysis
Hmm.
that this is the way that it is, that they're not able to get curious about what might be driving someone else or about what's happening inside themselves. And one of the hardest things I think about the work that I do is it's not it's not all just holding a beautiful container, right? Like
Right.
that's the first thing that has to happen. Like there has to be safety. But
Hmm.
typically people that work with me, and they usually work, honestly, it comes through totally through the back end because they work with me because they beat the hell out of themselves.
Right.
And so they think that I'm going to beat the hell out of them. And so they're attracted to that. They're like, oh yeah, I need to get my shit together and you're going to slap me around and all that kind of stuff. Right. And so, so they like that because I'm very direct, you know,
Right.
but in fact, of course, what we're doing is cultivating a self acceptance,
Hmm.
but a self acceptance and a self love that has some reality attached to it,
Right.
right? Like there are no good or bad people. Like we all have the DNA in us to kill somebody.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, we all have, you know, the DNA to love, you know, like that's, and we are all the things.
Yeah.
And we are getting completely bombarded constantly with our five senses. And so different parts show up at different times. And can we just be in observance of those parts?
Beautiful.
And if we can be in observance, then we can actually take responsibility,
Yeah.
you know, for them, as well as love ourselves through the heart moments.
Hmm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Curiosity is key.
Curiosity is key.
And
Yeah.
safety. I mean, and I think that when somebody was really does want to change and they haven't been able to on their own, I think that where coaching comes in and consulting is that coach, that consultant creates that really safe space for the curiosity to bloom.
Yeah. Because it's scary to be curious. I actually just wrote a blog that I literally haven't published because I'm like, I can't because I'll be disowned. Um, but I literally wrote it. It was what did I call it? It
Well,
was
just share it here.
yeah.
We won't disown you. You haven't disowned yourself.
I haven't disowned myself. No. Yeah, it's about consciousness, actually. If I can find it, I will share it here. I'm not sure what I did with it. I think I put it on I did put it on
Okay,
Oh,
we can
here it
grab the
is.
link. Yeah, go
I
for it.
have it. Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, the subject is I don't want to know this. Awakening isn't always butterflies and cellulite-free homemade chocolate chip cookies. In today's newsletter, I offer a consciousness challenge activity, at least for some. If you're striving for elevated consciousness properly, you should have excruciating moments, moments that feel like an overgrown calf bellowing through the birth canal. Those moments could be inner ones, in which you get honest about the vitriol, duplicity, and ugliness that lives inside you, the same stuff that lives in all of us. Public service announcement. If you are self flagellating, guilting, or shaming yourself, you aren't being honest. I'm talking about ruthless honesty, when you can say, yes, this is a part of myself. I don't like it, but I can see it, and leave it at that. Moments of awakening may also be learning about matters outside yourself, ones you'd be much happier not knowing. I've been a reluctant learner on this one. I have kicked and quite literally screamed. But the more I learn, the more I can't deny. I've had to abandon a lifelong identity that costs multiple relationships, best friends, and family alike. The hardest part of abandoning identity is to resist adopting a new one. It's like refusing to land after leaping off a lily pad, holding a commitment to remain suspended in midair. Generating curiosity when the information feels like it goes against your cellular makeup is too challenging for most of us. We throw up walls and justifications. However, I believe that as a collective, we are being brought to a spiritual awakening in the absolute last way anyone could ever predict. No matter the topic, don't ever take anyone's word, least of all when your mind, different from your essence, is in a huff and sure it's right. Do your own due diligence. I will warn you that it could challenge you in ways you don't want to be challenged. It has me. My mission is to be a contributor to the movement of elevated consciousness. Each day I strive to stay awake long enough to evolve in some small way. Some days I win and some days I learn. The learning is what I will never stop, and learning requires staying curious and remaining open. If you are one who bristles, this is your challenge activity. If nothing else, can you use this as an opportunity to observe your inner world? Is there a part of you that can remain open? And if you can't, can you be curious about that? I think I literally just encompassed everything we talked about.
I think that's like a book. Like that could be a whole book. That's the preface to the book. You could unpack
That's the
it.
premise of the book. Maybe I'll use that.
That is
You
so
heard it here
brilliant.
first. I owe it all to Aleya.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I see 8 chapters, like unpacking all those layers. And then the how too, right? Because a lot of the times we talk about the things but we don't give the how. And so people have the awareness and they're like, oh God, what do I do with this? And they don't go to the step 2 of, okay, now let's actually create the change.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is brilliant. I don't think you should be as disowned at all. I think people are actually ready for that now. They're uncomfortable enough,
Yeah, well, that's true.
right?
That's true. Yeah.
And in truth, when things are destabilized, it is the most powerful time for change. When things are really stable and consistent, change is almost impossible.
Yeah.
And so when we get frightened, when we get angry, when we get upset, when we feel like there is instability in the world, oh, it's an opportunity for transformation, for light, for a healthier way of being to come and create a more sustainable reality.
And of course, that's true because we all know, right? Like we change in crisis
Only typically.
when we're not given any other choice.
Right. When we have so from my perspective, everybody has different varying degrees of awareness and courage and strength and resilience. And so as we get more sensitive and we become more aware and we cultivate more self-love and self-worth, then we change with a whisper as opposed to the sledgehammer. When we're not very aware and we don't have a lot of self-love, we don't have a lot of resilience, we're going to be defensive, then the only time we change is when that change slams us like a 2x4.
Yeah. And don't you think it also has to do with tolerance? Like people have like a tremendous tolerance for misery.
Well, I actually think that those souls are just not very aware. And so it's like they're used to walking on the gravel path as opposed to the marble floor.
Yeah.
And so then the gravel path becomes more spiky and that helps them cultivate more awareness. So like the pain increases to an exponential point where they can't endure the suffering anymore. And they get pushed inside, which then starts building the self-awareness. And then we start walking a smoother path internally. And then we start walking the marble floor.
Yeah, I like that. I like your metaphors. You have great metaphors.
I pondered, like, how could I explain this? When I had
Yeah.
when I had my enlightenment experience in 2001 and could perceive multiple dimensions and guides, my guides challenged me and they said, this level of awareness that you have, you could go two ways. And I was like, what are the two ways? And they said, you could take your time to figure out how to explain what you're experiencing and be called brilliant, genius, or you could just sit with your experience and not figure out how to explain it, and you'll be called crazy. And I was like, I think I'm going to ponder how to explain my experience.
Or I think there's a third one because I can explain the experience and I'm still called crazy by some, right? Like there's always going to be
Well,
some that are still going to think it's
true,
crazy,
true.
you know.
But normal is crazy.
But that's true. Normal is crazy. I mean, the inner world is crazy. It's a crazy place. And this fantasy that we are somehow ever reaching enlightenment, that's a destination. And then
No,
I'll
it's
never
constant.
feel
It's
crazy
constant.
inside again is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
It's like many, many moments of enlightenment, right? They're teeny tiny. Sometimes we get a surge, but it never stops. And somebody
Yeah.
said to me the other day, they're like, well, I've mastered compassion. And I'm like, you never really master compassion. You just keep building on it, or we keep mastering discernment, right? There's all of these layers of like more and more and more and more refined, more refined and more refined. It's never the end point.
It's never the end point. Yeah. It makes me laugh because I have got a 14-year-old and he's sort of a fashionista. And whenever I say something like, I did not lose it over that or whatever, and he'll go, yeah. Cracks me up. I do
That's
that with my
great.
clients too. It's like,
I love it.
yeah.
Well, before we complete this lovely time together, is there anything that you want to share with the audience of things that they could ponder, things they could check out, things that you offer, where they could explore more of what you do?
Yeah, I'd love to direct people to the Intuition Incubator. I've had some amazing guests. I've got a lot of people lined up.
Great.
And there is a smattering of, sort of like real life, like how do you know when is something you're making an intuitive decision and how do you know when you're not,
Okay.
to some of this more woo-woo, kind of things like the light inside and all of that kind of stuff. And that's on Apple and Spotify and the podcast page on my website, abby@abbyhavermann.com. And I'll also give you some show notes if people want to take a saboteur assessment, which is the positive intelligence assessment, where they can find out what saboteurs, how they're self-sabotaging, what
Great.
personality parts are in the way. I'd be happy to do a saboteur discovery call with folks as well. So I'll put that in the chats too. But this was really, really fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby, for being on the show. And we will grab all of the links and post it in the YouTube on Buzzsprout and all of the places that the podcast exists. And just so grateful to you for taking the time and for the work that you do in the world.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Cups of Consciousness show with me, Aleya Dao. Receive a free month of the Cups of Consciousness. Go to 7cupsofconsciousness.com. When you get your free month, you will get 5 cups a week for 4 weeks. You'll also receive access to a live Tall Cup of Consciousness session. Feel free to review the show. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Aho.